Let us now turn our attention to Professor Ranade's conception of morality and its relationship to spirituality. For Ranade, morality and spirituality are inseparably linked, with the latter serving as the foundation and ultimate goal of the former. Morality is not merely a set of ethical norms or social rules, it is the expression of spiritual reality. The purpose of human existence is to know and unite with God. This discovery is not optional, but an essential imperative necessity. According to Professor Ranade, true morality arises from aligning one's actions, thoughts, and emotions with divine will. It is not an end in itself, but a pathway to discovering God. Thus, living a moral life is part of the broader process of realizing God, and every moral action is a step towards divine consciousness. He sees the ethical deal of duty, karma, as divine obligation and as the cornerstone of moral life. However, unlike a secular notion of duty, he imbues it with a spiritual significance. It must be performed with a single minded devotion to God and not ensnared by the desires of personal gain or expectation of happiness. Karma mityeva yat karma niyatam kriyate Arjuna. You ought to do a thing because it is your duty to do so. This is the general formulation of the categorical imperative in the Bhagavad Gita, according to Professor Ranade. Furthermore, as enjoined by the Bhagavad Gita, performance of duty as an offering to God in spirit of sacrifice yajna transforms ordinary life into a sacred journey. Action should be performed as an offering to God, free from attachment to results or personal gain, says the Gita. Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. This act without attachment or offering every action to the Supreme Being is to consecrate oneself to the higher order of existence. Professor Ranade emphasizes the indispensability of God in the moral sphere, inasmuch as God is the source of moral law, within and without. All ethical principles originate in the divine, and moral conduct is ultimately about aligning oneself to God's will. The goal of morality is not just about achieving social harmony or personal virtue, but also realizing one's unity with God. For Ranade, this realization is the highest moral and spiritual ideal. Professor Ranade identifies a range of virtues and interprets them through the lens of God devotion. Compassion or karuna reflects the devotee's prayerful alignment for God's mercy. That is, in turn, would necessitate showing compassion for all the creatures. The state of equanimity or samatha, um, the state of emotional balance, is both a precondition for and an outcome of devotion. For him, the perfect state of equanimity is only reached when one realizes God. Internal purity, shoch, absence of impure thoughts, selfish desires are the direct consequences of and go hand in hand with increasing devotion to God. The devotee of God sees divine presence in every being and thus exhibits ahimsa or harmlessness to others. Complete control over one's senses, Atma Vinigraha, is only possible when the supreme object of desire is God, which then helps cultivate the virtue of dispassion or asakti, non attachment. The feeling of fearlessness, abhaya, develops as the devotee gains confidence in God's presence and protection. To Professor Ranade, a complete sacrifice of all our belongings and desires for the purpose of God realization is the real meaning of yajna. It represents non-attachment or creates a desire to selflessly serve others. The ultimate state of tranquility, peace, or shanti is only possible when one realizes God. He emphasizes that such a state of peace is through and through permeated by the bliss of God and brings a state of Ishwar Bhav, lordliness, in the saint. He finds himself at the apex of greatness with the power to do good whenever and wherever he likes, and turns this to the service of humanity, paricharya. Each of these virtues is not merely a moral ideal, but a means of progressing towards God realization. Ranade employs the metaphor of an asymptote to describe the human journey towards God. While ultimate unity with God may seem infinitely distant, human beings are called to strive ever closer. Every virtuous act brings the individual a step closer to God. The devotee moves ever closer to God, which also makes him that much more morally perfect. This asymptotic approach underscores the dynamic nature of morality and spirituality. One must strive continuously, knowing that the journey itself is sacred, and even when perfection is unachievable. For Professor Ranade, the presence of spiritual teacher, guru, is indispensable in the moral and spiritual journey. The Guru, having realized God, provides direct insight and guidance, helping the seeker navigate the complexities of spiritual life. He is the embodiment of divine will and serves as a living example of what it means to align with God's will, inspiring others to follow. The spiritual teacher's grace accelerates the seeker's progress, often removing obstacles that would otherwise impede growth. Professor Ranade insists on the ultimate dependence on the spiritual teacher, emphasizing that self effort alone is insufficient to achieve God realization. Accordingly, Professor Date regards an individual's moral and spiritual efforts as the gunpowder that requires the spark of the spiritual teacher, which will result in manifestation of the experience of God. Professor Ranade uses the ethical thought in Bhagavad Gita as a framework and integrates it into the unified framework with God realization as the acme of all virtues, from which follow all other virtues, and the consummation of moral ideals. A continual striving for moral life and cultivation of virtues would lead one to what he calls a super moralism that involves rising superior to karmas and dharmas, all duties and all religions, and to meditate on the divine as the ultimate upshot of Bhagavad Gita's teaching, Sarva Dharma Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Braja. Transcending worldly concerns through divine love and surrender would result in what he calls beatificism, achieving ultimate peace and bliss through union with God. These dimensions collectively address the full spectrum of human moral and spiritual aspirations. To Professor Ranade, the saint as the ideal moral exemplar, an epitome of morality and spirituality, radiating solitary greatness and autonomy in communion with God. The saint's primary role is to create conditions for others to experience God, embodying selfless service as the highest moral ideal. Through divine grace, the saint possesses the ability to transform lives and promote universal welfare. Let us now see how Professor Ranade views Kantian conception of morality and how he traces its tenets in the light of Indian philosophy, particularly from the lens of mysticism. Professor Ranade acknowledges a similarity between the conception of the categorical imperative in Kant and the Bhagavad Gita. Ranade sums up Kant's general statement of duty as a universal law governing morality and his proposition that man must be regarded as an end in itself or end in himself as a fundamental tenet of the categorical imperative. He finds a remarkable similarity not only in formulation but in the process specifying the categorical imperative in Bhagavad Gita. The statement, you ought to do a thing because it is your duty to do so, contains first and foremost the overarching message of duty both in ordinary actions and in holy actions. This is further amplified by enjoining leaving away all attachment and desire for the outcomes or fruits. All such actions, whether good or bad, ordinary or holy, must be done without expectation of success or failure. Secondly, Gita specifies that one must perform the duty without requisite skill and with sense of one's duty without having to be fulfilled in a dispassionate manner with equanimity or asakti. Finally, Bhagavad Gita specifies that duty should be done in the spirit of sacrifice, yajna, since all such actions free the doer from the contamination. According to Ranade, this corresponds with Kant's kingdom of ends, in which beings equipped with reason organize the world in full accordance to the law of freedom, that is, categorical imperative. Similarly, yajna has both social and spiritual value, insofar as, in its ideal form, the sacrificial duty is performed for the benefit of the spirit as well as society in a dispassionate fashion without expectation of reward. The analysis of Sambonam from the point of view of adjustment of work in relation to reward was the moral proof of existence of God proposed by Kant in his critique of pure reason, and which was later discarded by him as untenable. On the one hand, this perspective on the summum bonum stands at odds with Professor Ranade's view on the concept. On the other hand, both philosophers nonetheless see some structural similarities in the ultimate results of their arguments. According to Ranade and Chandogya Upanishad, the ethical summum bonum in the mystical realization of triune unity of infinite, the I, and the Atman is the ultimate goal of an aspirant of moral and spiritual perfection. Morality is inextricably linked to the existence of God, which is the source of moral law. Unlike Kant, who grounds the moral law in human reason as a mere matter of fact, Ranade sees the moral law as the expression of divine will. For Professor Ranade, without acknowledging God, morality loses its ultimate foundation and purpose. Moral actions are not ends in themselves, but are stepping stones towards the realization of the divine. Nonetheless, Kant's philosophy yields a similarly uncompromising obligation to moral behavior. Even though he does not allow the existence of God as an object of theoretical knowledge, it is precisely the compelling inner sense of moral duty that separates humans from animals. And this duty implanted into human soul carries with it the obligation of to bring about a moral world of reason, the moral world or the realm of ends. According to practical reasoning, the possibility of such a realm in the result of God's existence is the result of God's existence as the guarantor of unity of the world, the critique, or as commanding authority, the opus posthumum. However, for Kant, God does not constitute the ultimate aim of moral actions. In contrast, for Ranade, morality becomes directionless without God as the ultimate aim. In his view, morality stems from the belief that God is the ideal of perfection. Human morality involves striving to align with this divine perfection. God is the ultimate insurer and governor of moral law. Professor Ranade describes human journey towards God as an asymptotic approach, a continuous striving to get closer to God but never fully becoming God. Just as an asymptote infinitely approaches a curve without ever touching it, the human soul strives endlessly to realize the divine qualities of truth, goodness, beauty, and love without ever completely attaining them. This journey involves constant moral and spiritual progress, where every action brings the individual closer to divine realization. The asymptote model implies humility, as humans must accept their limitations, yet it emphasizes the necessity of relentless effort towards self perfection. Once more, one can observe a structural similarity in Kant's views. For again and again, Kant highlights the idealistic nature of moral law. From a merely theoretical perspective, there is little hope that humans or an individual human bring about the moral world. Nonetheless, the categorical imperative within us compels us to always strive, against all odds, to act in a way that would engender the transformation of world into moral one. Additionally, it can be argued that a world fully conforming to the categorical imperative would be one fashioned in the likeness of pure reason, which, from a certain perspective, namely that of abstracting away any phenomenal hindrance with regards to such a goal, would be considered a purely nominal realm. Albeit unattainable within Kantian cosmology, the categorical imperative can be understood as carrying an obligation of unification with the nominal sphere, and Kant even calls such a moral realm a corpus mysticum for rational beings. However, everything nominal within Kantian thought, this corpus mysticum remains theoretically unattainable, and so that nothing can be said um, of the relationship between such an ideal moral world and God Himself. Ranade goes beyond Kant's mere practical postulate of God and asserts that discovering God is an existential necessity for humans, and the purpose of human existence is to know and unite with God. This discovery is not optional, but an essential aspect of life's meaning. Living a moral life is part of broader process of realizing God, and every moral action is a step towards divine consciousness. Although Kant sees God as a postulate of practical reason, whereas Ranade views God as an essence of moral and spiritual life, both philosophers converge in their view of the primacy of moral life, both in the social and the spiritual realm. Indeed, as Professor Ranade asserts, the chief criterion of reality of mystical experience is its capacity for the definite moral development of the individual and the society. With this, we end our lecture. Thank you very much for your kind invitation and your attention. We'd like to have some feedback from you. It's a journey that Dr. Pesh and I have started, and this is our initial foray into the complex thought process of morality, both in Kant and Professor Ranade's philosophies. Thanks.